Okay, let's start with something that sounds simple, maybe deceptively simple. What is knowledge? It feels pretty straightforward, doesn't it? Just facts, things you learn maybe from a textbook or a source you trust. But what if it's not quite like that? What if what we think of as knowledge isn't universal, isn't purely objective? What if it's actually shaped, profoundly shaped, by something we often just ignore? So today, on the deep dive, that's what we're exploring. How our culture really influences what we learn, how we understand the world around us. We've got some really interesting sources lined up from, general learning theories right through to a specific historical example that I think really brings this home.
Exactly, and it's such a crucial point. Acquiring knowledge, it's way more complex than just soaking up facts like a sponge.
Hmm.
It's fundamentally rooted in our social world, our cultural contexts.
Hmm.
And seeing it that way, it really changes how you look at everything you learn.
Okay, so let's unpack this then. How does culture fundamentally shape the way we get and process information? Because, like you said, it's not just what we learn, it feels like it's also about how we learn it.
Right. So when we talk about culture, we're talking about those shared things, beliefs, values, norms, practices, the way a group does things. And this stuff, it influences basically everything, how we think, our actual thought patterns, even how we organize knowledge, how we pass it on. Think about different ways people solve problems. Some cultures might really value a linear step-by-step approach. Others might be more, collaborative or holistic, looking at the bigger picture first, or just communication itself. You have societies built on oral traditions, passing knowledge through stories and speech, and others that heavily prioritize written texts. These aren't just minor differences. They fundamentally shape how knowledge is structured and understood.
Hmm. So, are there specific theories, frameworks that help us get a handle on this interplay between culture and learning?
Well, definitely. A lot of this thinking comes from sociocultural theories of learning. And one key figure here is Lev Vygotsky. Vygotsky's big argument was that knowledge isn't just developed inside an individual's mind in isolation. Instead, he said, it's constructed, built through social interactions using what he called cultural tools.
Yeah.
And a really central idea for him was the zone of proximal development, ZPD, which is basically that sweet spot where learning happens. It's what you can do with help from someone who knows more, a teacher, a parent, even a friend. It really highlights how crucial our social environment, our culture is to learning. And speaking of those cultural tools Vygotsky mentioned, language is probably the big one, the most powerful. Because language, it isn't just for communicating ideas after we have them. It's actually a fundamental tool for thinking. The words we use, the way we categorize things, label them, that shapes our understanding from the get-go. Our thoughts are kind of molded by our language, and that language comes straight out of our culture.
Wow, okay. Language as a tool for thinking. How far does that go? I mean, can language really change how we perceive reality itself? That sounds like a huge claim.
Well, there's compelling evidence it can. Take Benjamin Lee Whorf's work, for example. He studied the Hopi language. Now, in English, we've got tons of words for time, right? Past, present, future, second, minute, hour, era. Whorf observed that the Hopi language didn't really have a single abstract word for time quite like ours. Their language structured the concept differently. And he argued that this linguistic difference could actually lead to a genuinely different way of experiencing time. Not just talking about it differently, but thinking about it, perceiving it differently. It suggests a distinct cognitive framework.
Okay, that's mind-bending. So how does this play out practically? Like in schools, in our education systems, how do these cultural influences show up there?
Yeah, education systems are completely embedded in culture. You can't separate them. Take the Indian education system, for instance. Historically, there's been a really strong emphasis on rote memorization, learning things by heart, especially for exams. Now, that approach reflects certain cultural values about knowledge, about respect for tradition, maybe. But now, you also see a big push there towards more interactive, student-led learning, reflecting, perhaps, changing cultural priorities. Or contrast that with many indigenous cultures. Their knowledge is often passed down through oral traditions, through communal storytelling. Learning isn't just about your individual score in a test. It's about shared wisdom, connecting generations. So for you, as someone learning anything, just being aware of this stuff is huge. It helps you understand why people from different backgrounds might approach learning in totally different ways. And that can make your own learning richer.
This whole idea of culture shaping learning is really powerful. But let's make it super concrete. Let's talk about Charles Darwin. Evolution, because this seems like a perfect test case, right? You think of evolution as this objective scientific fact. It exists whether we discover it or not, unlike, I don't know, a piece of art. And yet, You're saying culture was absolutely critical for Darwin's ideas to actually take hold.
It absolutely was. And it's a great example. I mean, evolution as a process was happening. Other scientists were getting close to similar ideas around the same time. But Darwin is the name everyone knows. Why him? What was really fascinating about the origin of species is that its massive success wasn't just because the evidence was strong, though it was. It was also because Darwin, maybe instinctively, maybe consciously, understood his audience, his culture. He didn't just lay out facts. He structured his book almost like a narrative. He used these incredibly powerful metaphors.
Metaphors, like what? Give us some examples.
Okay, two big ones. The tree of life. Such a potent image, right? Captures that idea of common ancestry, branching, diversification over time, growth, change. And then, right near the end of the book, he gives us the tangled bank, this rich, complex image of a riverbank teeming with different plants, birds, insects, all interacting. It conveys the complexity, the interconnectedness of life. These weren't just illustrations. They were cultural touchstones. They made a radical idea feel somehow familiar, accessible. And you can connect this back to Darwin himself. His background wasn't just science. He'd studied theology. He engaged with philosophy. And think about it, religion, philosophy, they also try to explain the world, just like science. But the humanities often use narrative stories, where science uses data. Darwin brilliantly fused them. He used scientific observation, mountains of it, but he presented it within a narrative framework. He almost personified concepts like time, birth, death. He wrote about the struggle for existence, a deeply resonant human theme, and that tree of life metaphor. That image appears in Christian traditions, in ancient mythologies all over the world. So he tapped into something already culturally present. It gave people an entry point.
So it was the way he presented it. Carefully crafted, not so radical it scared everyone off immediately, but vivid enough, metaphorical enough to make the science stick. And it worked so well that even today, people arguing against evolution often still use Darwin's language, his metaphors, like the tree of life. That's incredible cultural persistence.
Exactly. His presentation was key to its acceptance.
Okay, so culture shapes knowledge. We see that with Darwin. But does it flow the other way, too? Can new knowledge actually turn around and reshape the culture itself?
Oh, absolutely. It's definitely a two-way street. Darwin's ideas are a perfect example of this, too. His discoveries rippled out far beyond science labs. They fundamentally shifted how humanity saw its place in the grand scheme of things. That sparked huge philosophical debates. I mean, if all species come from common ancestors, what does that really mean for human uniqueness? Where do we draw the lines? And then the later realization that species can and do go extinct and that we can cause it, that forces a whole reckoning. Suddenly you have questions about responsibility. If we can wipe out a species, do we have a moral obligation to try and protect others, to conserve the environment? These weren't mainstream concerns before in the same way.
Right. And how do those changing ideas, those moral questions, actually impact society? Does it change, say, what science gets done?
It can, yeah. When society starts valuing conservation more, for example, you might see more funding flow towards environmental science, ecology, animal protection research. More scientists focus on those areas.
Yeah.
But then you have competing values, right? Like maybe a strong cultural focus on economic growth above all else. That can push back, making it seem perfectly acceptable to use up resources if it's profitable, regardless of the environmental cost. So yeah, culture's dominant philosophy, its political priorities, they absolutely shape which research gets funded and pursued. And more broadly, think about breakthroughs in medicine or agriculture. They change how we live, our daily practices, our beliefs about health and food. New understanding of the natural world can even, over time, lead people to reconsider long-held religious or spiritual beliefs. It's a constant interplay.
Okay, but this interaction between knowledge and culture, it's not always positive, is it? Are there dangers? Risks of ideas getting twisted or misused when they filter through a cultural lens?
Unfortunately, yes. That is a huge risk and something we absolutely have to acknowledge. Sticking with Darwin, concepts drawn from his work, like Darwinism or survival of the fittest, which isn't even his phrase originally, but it got associated with him, were horrifically distorted. They were misused to justify things like social Darwinism, eugenics, even genocide. Truly terrible applications, and it's crucial, absolutely crucial to be clear. Those interpretations have nothing to do with Darwin's actual scientific theory or his intentions. Evolution describes how life changes. It doesn't prescribe a moral code. Nature doesn't operate on right or wrong, but humans do. Scientists have moral views, societies have biases, and science can be filtered through those discriminatory lenses, especially when social attitudes are deeply prejudiced. This history serves as a stark reminder. It really underscores why science needs to be conducted responsibly, ethically, with an awareness of its potential impact.
And this is where maybe training in the humanities and history, philosophy, cultural studies can be so valuable for scientists.
Yeah.
Understanding historical context, recognizing cultural biases. It can help prevent repeating those past mistakes, help ensure knowledge is used to benefit, not harm.
So wrapping this up, what's the big takeaway for someone listening, for you as a learner? It seems like this deep dive reveals something really profound, that science and, say, philosophy or narrative, they aren't totally separate worlds. Biology, storytelling, they're often wrestling with the same massive questions: life, death, what it means to be human, our place in the cosmos, just using different languages, different tools.
Exactly. And Darwin's story really drives that home. His success wasn't just the data, it was the powerful fusion of scientific evidence with a compelling, culturally resonant narrative. Without that connection, without those metaphors that made sense to people, his groundbreaking ideas might have just stayed in academic journals. It might have reshaped our world in the way they did. History could look very different. So maybe a question for you to think about is, how does this play out in your own life? How do you think cultural differences, maybe your own cultural background, influence how you learn? Have you ever noticed cultural norms shaping how you tackle a problem or how you approach studying a new subject? It's definitely worth pondering.
Because humanity isn't just one thing, is it? It's this incredible collection of different stories, different narratives. Darwin managed to tell a scientific story that resonated across many of those narratives. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? What would our understanding look like if his story hadn't landed that way? And maybe more importantly, what unseen cultural stories are shaping the knowledge we take for granted right now?